What would you do if you found like a missing chapter to the most widely read book in human history?
I mean, that would be completely mind-blowing.
Right. And we're not just talking about a minor footnote or, a little filler chapter. We mean a massive text that explains the exact origin of demons.
Yeah, and maps out the specific architecture of the afterlife.
Exactly. And even details this unauthorized transfer of ancient forbidden technology to humanity.
It really is wild.
So today's deep dive is into the intense, centuries-old historical and theological debate surrounding the Book of Enoch. And we need to put a massive disclaimer right at the front door here.
Oh, absolutely.
As your guides through these sources, we are not here to tell you if this book is divine truth or just dangerous fiction. We aren't taking a theological side, and we're not defending the traditional biblical canon either.
Right. Our only mission today is to impartially unpack the historical debate. We want to look at the astonishing overlaps and explore the massive gap between what ancient texts actually say and, well, what you probably learned in Sunday school.
Yeah, because that gap is exactly why this text have been sparking such intense debate for millennia.
It really has. So we're going to look at a detailed scriptural and historical analysis today, one that places accepted, canonical Bible verses right next to this ancient apocryphal text.
Which is fascinating because we want to explore why the traditional Western church largely left it out of the Bible.
Yeah.
While early biblical figures seem to, quote it as absolute reality.
Yeah, it's an incredible exercise in understanding how ancient people viewed their cosmos.
So grab your own Bible or just a curious mind and settle in. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
By starting with the man himself. In the canonical Bible, specifically Genesis 5.24 and Hebrews 11.5, the text introduces a guy named Enoch.
Right, the seventh from Adam.
Yeah, and it states very simply that Enoch walked with God and was no more because God took him. He's one of those exceptionally rare figures in these texts who didn't experience death.
He just left.
He just left. But the Bible gives almost zero details about what that actually means.
Well, from a traditionalist perspective, that brevity is entirely intentional. I mean, the canonical focus of Genesis isn't on the cosmic mechanics of exactly where Enoch went.
Right, it's focused on his faith.
Exactly, his faith and his relationship with the Creator. But, ancient audiences weren't exactly satisfied with that brevity.
They wanted details.
They did. So during what historians call the intertestamental period, which is that roughly 400-year chaotic gap between the last book of the Old Testament and the first book of the New Testament, a massive narrative began circulating.
Because Jewish culture was in total upheaval, right?
Yeah, they were under foreign occupation, and people were desperately looking for answers about why the world was so broken. So the Book of Enoch arrives, takes that brief mention in Genesis, and just explodes it into this detailed cosmic journey.
And when you say a detailed cosmic journey, I mean, the sources show he's describing dimensional travels, visions of massive cosmic gears, the actual structural layout of God's throne room.
It reads almost like ancient science fiction.
It really does.
Yeah.
Now, if you are listening to this and wondering why you've never read it, it's because the Book of Enoch is considered apocryphal.
And we should probably define that term really quickly because it gets thrown around a lot.
Go for it.
Apocryphal simply refers to writings that were widely read and culturally significant to ancient communities, but ultimately did not make the official final cut when religious councils were deciding what made up the authoritative Bible.
Right. So the church today largely views the Book of Enoch as speculative historical literature.
Yeah, mostly just a historical curiosity.
But, and here is the massive historical contradiction our sources highlight in the official New Testament canon, specifically Jude 1.14, written by Jude, the brother of Jesus. He explicitly quotes Enoch.
He does.
He says, Enoch the seventh from Adam prophesied about them. He doesn't quote him as a poet or a philosopher, he quotes him as a prophet.
Which is a huge distinction.
It is. So if an official apostle uses this specific book to validate a canonical letter, isn't that a bit like citing a banned blacklisted textbook in your doctoral thesis?
That's a great analogy.
I mean, why would the historical church tell you not to read a book that an apostle used to prove a foundational theological point?
Well, that is the ultimate question of authority for historians. Traditional biblical scholars point out that quoting an author doesn't automatically make their entire body of work divinely inspired.
Okay, fair.
Like the Apostle Paul, for example. He quotes Greek poets in Acts 17 to build a bridge with an Athenian audience. He wasn't saying those Greek poets were prophets.
Right, he was just relating to them.
Exactly. So the church's historical stance has been to prioritize scriptures that are safe, reliable, and laser-focused on the core message of human salvation. They viewed Enoch's esoteric cosmic travels as a distraction.
I understand the Greek poet comparison, I really do. But Jude specifically uses the word prophesied.
True.
He's treating Enoch's words as a divine warning. And if Enoch really was a prophet, his most shocking prophecy is about exactly how the world got so violently corrupted before Noah's flood.
Oh, this is where it gets really intense.
Yeah, Genesis 6.1 to 4 drops this massive cliffhanger that my Sunday school definitely glossed over. It casually mentions the sons of God mating with human women to produce a race of giants called the Nephilim.
Just a casual biological bombshell.
Exactly. The canonical Bible drops that and then just moves on quickly to the flood. But Enoch takes pause and zooms way, way in.
Yeah, Enoch provides a deeply expansive, highly specific backstory. He names these beings the Watchers.
The Watchers.
Right. According to the text, these were 200 angelic beings who descended on Mount Hermon, literally abandoning their heavenly posts to interfere with humanity.
And it wasn't just about creating a race of giants either. The Book of Enoch says these Watchers brought forbidden technology to humanity.
Which is fascinating.
It explicitly lists things like metallurgy, the forging of swords and shields, the creation of mirrors, and even cosmetics and makeup.
Which is wild because it perfectly parallels Genesis 4.22.
Yes. Genesis suddenly, out of nowhere, mentions a guy named Tubal-Cain as this master of bronze and iron. Enoch actually provides the how for that sudden technological leap.
Right, because the canonical book of Genesis never explicitly explains an angelic sin or a heavenly rebellion leading up to the flood.
It just focuses on human wickedness.
Exactly. But we see echoes of this exact angelic rebellion later in the New Testament. 2 Peter 2.4 and Jude 1.6 both mention angels who sinned, who left their proper dwelling, and are now chained in a place called Tartarus, awaiting judgment.
Wait, Tartarus. Isn't that from Greek mythology?
It is, yeah.
Why is a Greek underworld term showing up in a Jewish text about angels?
That is a brilliant detail. Tartarus is indeed the Greek mythological supermax prison for the Titans.
Okay.
So when the writer of 2 Peter used that word, he was essentially doing what a modern speaker does when they reference the Matrix.
Oh, I see.
He was using a culturally understood, intense concept of an inescapable cosmic prison to explain to his Greek-speaking audience exactly what happened to these Watchers. He's translating an ancient Jewish concept into a Greek framework.
Wow. So the New Testament writers clearly know the story of the Watchers. But traditional theology often pushes back on this whole angels mating with humans idea, right?
They do, heavily. The traditional historical interpretation is often called the Sethite view.
The Sethite view.
Right. This view argues that the phrase sons of God in Genesis 6 wasn't talking about angels at all. It simply meant the righteous human lineage of Seth.
Okay, so just humans.
Exactly. Yeah. The idea is that Seth's righteous descendants began mixing with the wicked human lineage of Cain. And this interpretation is crucial for traditional theology because it keeps the blame for human corruption squarely on human shoulders.
Like in Jeremiah 17.9, where it says the human heart is deceitful above all things.
Precisely.
I mean, it's the theological equivalent of keeping the investigation inside the company.
That's a good way to put it.
If the corruption is an inside job, just bad humans making bad choices, then a global flood as God's judgment makes logical sense. But if it's an alien corporate espionage situation,
where angelic watchers are hacking into humanity
and giving us unauthorized tech, it completely changes the liability. Admitting an angelic invasion shifts the blame away from human moral failure. Plus, righteous humans marrying unrighteous humans doesn't naturally produce giant Nephilim.
No, it doesn't.
That lineage doesn't just create 12-foot-tall genetic anomalies.
It definitely introduces a level of supernatural chaos that makes theological neatness impossible. The traditional church preaches a very clean version of Noah's flood based entirely on bad human morals.
Clean and simple.
Right. But Enoch's version reads like a sci-fi biological horror story of unauthorized technology transfers and genetic tampering.
And that chaos extends to the origin of evil itself, specifically concerning the concept of Azazel and the desert prison.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
Yeah, speaking of these chained watchers, Enoch details exactly where they're imprisoned, and the sources connect this directly to one of the most famous solemn rituals in Jewish history.
Right, Yom Kippur.
Exactly. In Leviticus 16, we get the description of the Day of Atonement. The high priest takes a goat, places the sins of the people on it, and sends it out into the desert for Azazel. Now, most modern Bibles translate Azazel simply as a scapegoat.
But in the book of Enoch, Azazel isn't a concept or a description of a goat.
He's not.
No, Azazel is a proper noun. He is the leader of the Watchers.
Wow.
Enoch describes how the archangel Raphael is commanded to bind Azazel hand and foot and throw him into the darkness of a specific desert wasteland called Dudale.
Think about how this reframes the entire Yom Kippur ritual. I mean, instead of the high priest just send the people's sins out into empty space to magically absolve them, he is symbolically returning the sin virus directly back to the original hacker who coded it.
Returning to sender.
Yes, he's sending the corruption back to Azazel in his desert prison. It gives the ritual a deeply visceral, combative meaning.
It really does. And Enoch also answers another massive lingering question from the New Testament,
which is
the origin of demons. According to the text, when those giant Nephilim died in the floodwaters, their physical bodies were destroyed, but their spirits couldn't pass on.
Because they were a freakish hybrid.
Exactly, immortal angel and mortal human. So they were cursed to wander the earth as unclean spirits. They're essentially disembodied entities desperately seeking physical bodies to inhabit.
I was actually looking at the notes on Matthew 12.43 for this.
Yeah.
Jesus describes unclean spirits wandering through arid places, seeking rest and looking for a body to return to.
Yep, perfectly matches.
The canonical Bible never actually tells us where demons come from. It just assumes the reader knows what they are. But Enoch provides the complete origin story that perfectly explains that exact behavior.
However, this is exactly where traditional theologians raise a massive red flag.
Oh, sure. Why?
Well, the concern is that texts like Enoch breed a morbid fascination with demonic biographies and, spiritual Alcatrazes.
I get that. Yeah, the canonical Bible, even when it uses similar imagery, like Revelation 20 describing a dragon chained in an abyss, always keeps the focus purely on God's final victory and human redemption. So the argument against Enoch is that obsessing over the mechanics of demonic origins distracts believers from the simplicity of salvation.
Exactly.
Well, listen, if you are enjoying having your mind blown by these ancient historical connections so far, make sure you hit subscribe and follow us for more custom deep dives. Because if you think the origin of demons is wild, it's nothing compared to how Enoch maps out the rest of the cosmos.
So true.
It's one thing to explain where demons come from, but Enoch also maps out exactly where we go.
That's a crucial point. Enoch doesn't just map out the origins of evil, he literally maps out the afterlife.
Right.
And the New Testament writers seem to be referencing his specific map.
Right. I was reading the sources on Luke 16, where Jesus tells the famous story of the rich man and Lazarus. He describes a highly specific, compartmentalized geography of the afterlife.
He talks about Abraham's bosom.
Exactly. A place of comfort called Abraham's bosom, which is separated from a place of fiery torment by a great chasm. But according to Old Testament theology, that highly structured afterlife didn't exist.
You're right. The Old Testament just had a vague, shadowy concept of the grave called Sheol.
Just a general waiting room.
Yeah, it was just the place of the dead, with very little distinction between the righteous and the wicked. But if you read Enoch chapter 22, it meticulously maps out 4 specific compartmentalized divisions for souls awaiting judgment.
And one of those divisions is specifically for murdered souls crying out for justice.
Which powerfully echoes the imagery in Revelation 6.
Right, where the souls of the martyrs under the altar cry out for their blood to be avenged.
And it's not just the underworld either.
No.
Enoch describes traveling to the ends of the earth and seeing 7 mountains of precious stones. The middle mountain reaches to heaven and acts as God's throne, and he describes it as being made of sapphire.
Wait, sapphire. That is strikingly, almost word for word, identical to the canonical prophet Ezekiel's vision of God's throne in Ezekiel 1.26.
It really is. Enoch also wades into deep controversy by pushing a strict 364-day solar calendar.
A calendar.
Yeah, he claims that altering the times and seasons is a profound sign of cosmic apostasy.
Okay, why would a calendar be a sign of cosmic apostasy? What's the mechanism there?
Well, to the ancient mind, the calendar wasn't just about knowing when to plant crops. It dictated the exact days for sacred religious festivals.
I see.
So if your calendar is wrong, you are performing sacred rituals on the wrong days, essentially falling out of sync with the divine rhythm of the universe.
So it's seen as a rebellion against God's established order.
Exactly. And this resonates heavily with Daniel 7.25, which warns about an evil entity that will try to change the set times and the laws.
That's a deep connection.
Yeah.
And the sources also note that Enoch describes stars not as inanimate balls of gas, but as conscious angelic beings that possess free will and can sin.
Yeah, which is hard for us to grasp today.
I mean, how did ancient people look up at the sky and see angels instead of burning gas?
We have to strip away our modern scientific understanding of astrophysics here.
Okay, pretend I don't know what a telescope is.
Right. Ancient people looked at the night sky and saw perfect, glowing entities moving in precise, predictable mathematical patterns, completely untouched by the chaos and corruption of human Earth.
So they looked divine.
To them, these celestial bodies looked exactly like divine sentinels or angels. This is why Job 38.7 talks about the morning stars singing together.
Oh, wow.
It also perfectly explains Revelation 9.1, where John literally sees a star fall from heaven that is handed a key to the abyss.
Right, because you don't hand a physical key to a burning ball of hydrogen.
Exactly.
Now, the standard academic explanation for all this is that Jesus and the New Testament writers were simply speaking the cultural language of Second Temple Judaism.
Right, using the common vernacular.
Yeah, like just because a teacher uses a familiar apocryphal concept to teach a greater moral truth, it doesn't mean they are rubber stamping the entire book. But, I have to push back on that.
Go ahead.
If Jesus uses Enoch's highly specific, structured map to explain heaven and hell to his followers, isn't he validating the map?
I see where you're going.
It's like a university professor using the map of Middle-earth to teach a real applied geography lesson. You wouldn't use Tolkien's coordinates unless you actively wanted your students to think Mordor was a real place they needed to avoid.
That's a fair point. But the counter-argument is that the authority lies in the moral teaching itself, not the illustrative framework.
So the map isn't the point.
Right. Jesus is using the furniture of their minds to explain a deeper truth about justice and eternity. But your point highlights exactly why the debate over Enoch is so intense.
Are these just useful metaphors or actual glimpses into the spiritual realm?
Exactly. And the most profound overlap between Enoch and the New Testament isn't even about geography or demons or calendars. It's about the identity of the ultimate judge who oversees this entire cosmic clockwork.
You mean the Son of Man?
Yes.
Because if you read the Gospels, Jesus' absolute favorite title for himself wasn't Son of God or Messiah. It was the Son of Man.
And traditionalists always point to the book of Daniel, chapter 7, for the origin of this title.
Right, where there is a vision of one, like a Son of Man approaching the Ancient of Days. It's a powerful messianic image.
It is. But the book of Enoch, specifically a section known as the Parables of Enoch, takes this concept much further.
How so?
Enoch uses Son of Man to explicitly describe a pre-existent heavenly judge. This figure sits on a throne of glory and judges kings and nations.
Wow, that sounds exactly like Jesus' words in Matthew 25, where he says, the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne to judge the nations.
Yep.
And we shouldn't forget Matthew 22:30, where Jesus says that in the resurrection, humans will be like the angels in heaven, a concept of human and angelic boundaries that is detailed exhaustively throughout Enoch.
The parallels are undeniable.
So, if the connections are this deep, why did the Western Church drop this book completely, while the Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept it?
That is a fascinating historical divergence.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is an ancient, massive branch of Christianity, and they never removed the Book of Enoch. They kept it in their official biblical canon, and it remains there to this day.
So they don't view it as Apocrypha?
Not at all. They view it as scripture. And the reason for this comes down to geography and history. The Ethiopian Church was geographically isolated from the Hellenistic and Roman standardization councils that shaped the Western canon.
Ah, so they weren't in the room when the cuts were being made.
Exactly. Because of this isolation, they retained much older, more mystical Jewish traditions.
Meanwhile, the Western Historical Church decided that the canonical New Testament represents the absolute fullness of revelation. They wanted to streamline the message.
Yes. As the Gospel of John and prophets like Micah establish, the pre-existence of Christ is solidly in the canon without needing Enoch.
So they didn't need the extra baggage.
Right. The Western consensus was that while Enoch might contain beautiful shadows of truth, it also contains confusing pre-scientific cosmologies, like literal doors in the sky for the wind.
Literal doors.
Yeah, physical doors. And they felt those details ultimately distract from the simple, vital gospel of human redemption.
It raises an important question about the nature of revelation itself, doesn't it?
It definitely does.
I mean, did the New Testament writers copy Enoch to flesh out their theology? Or were they all, Jesus included, drinking from the same ancient prophetic well of truth?
A well that the Western Church later decided to cement over out of fear that it was just too complex for the average believer.
Yeah. So what does this all mean for us today? When we distill all these sources, the core takeaway seems to be a tale of two different frameworks.
Summarize them for us.
Well, the canonical Bible we know is a highly focused, deeply economical story. It hones in on human responsibility, moral failure, redemption, and the elegant simplicity of Christ.
Right.
The Book of Enoch, on the other hand, is this dizzying, complex universe of cosmic bureaucracies, ancient watchers, conscious stars, and highly specific spiritual mechanics.
And why you, the listener, should care about this historical debate is because it forces us to interrogate our own worldview.
Exactly.
It asks us directly how we view the spiritual world. Is the spiritual realm simply a moral metaphor used to teach us to be better people?
Or is it a visceral, historical, highly complex reality operating all around us, complete with its own history, hierarchy, and ongoing conflicts?
It really changes everything about how you read the text.
It does. The Bible tells us that Enoch was taken because he walked with God. But if walking with God showed Enoch a universe that was far more terrifying, vast, and fundamentally mysterious than our neat Sunday school traditions allow.
Then you have to wonder about the church's historical silence.
Right. Is the church's historical silence on his book a form of necessary spiritual protection, keeping us focused on the main thing? Or is it a restriction of profound knowledge?
It's the ultimate tension between the safety of tradition and the vertigo of an impossibly complex truth.
Vertigo is a great word for it. So here's a final thought to mull over. The next time you step outside at night and look up at the stars, ask yourself what you're really looking at.
Yeah.
Are they just burning balls of gas in a cold, empty vacuum?
Mm-hmm.
Or, as Enoch claimed so many millennia ago, are they ancient conscious beings? And are they watching back?
That is a chilling thought to end on.
We'd love to hear where you land on this. Is Enoch a lost treasure or a dangerous distraction? Drop a comment, share your thoughts, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next custom deep dive.